Did you know that Roman soldiers had retirement plans? That's right. Centuries before modern pensions, the Romans were already rewarding their warriors after years of service. But was this retirement as good as it sounds? In today's video, we'll reveal how this system worked, who actually managed to retire, and what benefits or pitfalls soldiers faced at the end of their careers. Stay until the end, because the way Rome took care of, or neglected, its veterans might surprise you. The sun was low on the horizon, casting an orange hue on the imposing columns of the Roman Forum. The city buzzed with daily activity, but something unusual caught attention that afternoon. An elderly man, with a graying beard and shoulders marked by decades of combat, slowly walked along the Via Sacra. His heavy cloak dragged across the stones, and his worn sandals made the sound of a long and tiring journey. On his face, a mixture of fatigue and gratitude. This veteran, now far from the battlefields, was an example of a Roman system that was beginning to take shape and would, over time, revolutionize how soldiers were treated. The Roman military retirement system. For centuries, the Roman legions were the backbone of the empire, conquering lands and expanding borders with relentless discipline. However, with each battle came a crucial question. How could the empire ensure that these men, who had given everything for Rome's greatness, had a dignified future once their bodies were worn out by war? The concern for veterans wasn't just a matter of humanity, but of strategy. Discontented soldiers, who couldn't find a way to support their families or reintegrate into society, could become a threat. Rome was fully aware that a well-fed, well-paid, and well-cared-for army was essential for its stability. This meant that the empire needed to think beyond the battle, looking toward the future of those who had defended its lands and laws. Rome had already faced periods of internal turmoil, such as the revolts during the Republic, when the Gracchi brothers attempted social and economic reforms to ease the growing tension between the military and the Roman elite. However, it was under the leadership of a visionary emperor, Augustus, that the military retirement system was concretely shaped, with a keen eye on what might happen when these soldiers returned to obscurity. With an empire growing day by day, ensuring a dignified life for veterans became a pragmatic necessity. Military service was not for everyone. Legionaries faced extremely harsh conditions: long marches under scorching sun, violent battles, poor food, and the constant threat of death. Therefore, guaranteeing a reward that ensured the well-being of these warriors after so many years of sacrifice was a way to maintain order, avoid revolts, and ensure ongoing loyalty to the empire. With every victory on the battlefield, Rome not only conquered lands, but also strengthened itself as an unbeatable machine. However, Augustus knew that the true stability of the empire didn't depend only on the strength of its legions, but on the trust and care shown to those who sustained it. Thus, under his leadership, an innovative retirement system was created, forming a safety net that ensured veterans would continue to serve Rome, but now in a new role, as pillars of society, with a stable future for them and their families. This system aimed not only to prevent veterans from falling into poverty, but also to integrate these men into a new phase of their lives, where their experience and skills would be used to strengthen the empire, whether helping pacify new provinces or taking on administrative roles, transforming them into essential elements for maintaining Roman power. And so, the old veteran walking the streets of Rome was not just a symbol of sacrifice, but of a quiet revolution, a revolution that would ensure that the Roman Empire would also become a model for how to treat those who defended its borders, protected its laws, and spread its name throughout the ancient world. In the intense heat of ancient Rome, a crucial lesson was being learned in the shadows of the city's ancient walls. The Roman Empire was known for its unbeatable military discipline, but internal challenges were equally great. It wasn't enough to conquer lands and extend borders if the foundation of society was being eroded. The history of internal revolts, such as those led by the Gracchi brothers during the Republic, was a clear reminder that the stability of the empire didn't rely solely on external strength, but also on maintaining the support of its own citizens, especially its soldiers. During that turbulent period, the Gracchi brothers tried to implement reforms to alleviate the pressure on soldiers and the plebeians. They saw that the discontent of the armies, who weren't treated well after retirement or after returning from war, could turn into a threat. When Rome failed to meet the needs of its soldiers, frustration erupted. The result was an increase in social tensions and the growing possibility that these soldiers might one day turn against the empire itself. This scenario left a lasting mark on Roman leaders. The need to reform how the empire treated its armies was no longer a simple matter of benevolence. It became a matter of survival. Rome's rulers were beginning to understand that without a satisfied army, internal peace could collapse, allowing factions and rebellions to erode the foundations of the empire. The example of discontented armies during the Republic served as a warning that a mistreated army could eventually become a danger to the very empire it served. It was in this context that Roman leaders began to see the need for an organized system to take care of their soldiers after service. The empire needed a structure that went beyond the makeshift solutions of the past and provided a stable future for those who dedicated their lives to the Roman cause. Previous compensation ideas, such as land distribution, had already shown their limitations. Many soldiers, upon returning from war, didn't know how to cultivate the land granted to them, or were physically unable to work due to the wounds they sustained in battle. This problem pointed to the need for a more robust, comprehensive solution. But Rome, being Rome, wasn't willing to adopt any simple solution. They needed something grand, something that would ensure their soldiers were not only reintegrated into society, but continued to be an active part of the empire's machinery, even after retirement. It was amid this period of learning and reflection that the search for a solution began. A military retirement system that wouldn't just be a favor, but an essential part of Roman policy. The solution didn't come just from a desire to do good by the veterans, but from a strategic need to maintain the support of the men who were the empire's pillars. The retirement system would be the key to ensuring that soldiers didn't feel betrayed by the empire at the end of their military careers, but valued for their services. Thus, this emerging system was not inspired solely by a desire to protect veterans or guarantee their future. It was a pragmatic response to one of the greatest internal threats Rome could face: a revolt by its own armies. By building a model that ensured a stable future for soldiers, Rome was not only caring for its loyal sons, but also preserving the solid foundation upon which the empire rested. In the early days of Rome, before it became the vast empire that would dominate the ancient world, the rewards for soldiers returning from battles were often improvised and lacked stability. The empire was in its early stages, and the infrastructure needed to support veterans was still under construction. Even so, the loyalty of the soldiers was unquestionable. They fought for the empire's borders, but at the end of their campaigns, many were left on the fringes of society, with poorly defined rewards. Initially, Rome offered land as compensation for retired legionaries. When a soldier finished his service, or after a significant victory, he could be gifted pieces of land, often in remote or newly conquered regions, such as the empire's provinces. These lands were seen as a tangible prize for years of combat, a reward symbolizing the protection and expansion of Roman borders. However, the reality of the lands granted was far different from the ideal. For many soldiers, these lands didn't represent the start of a new life, but the beginning of an even greater struggle. Although the empire was vast and full of conquered lands, not all soldiers were prepared to work the land. Many wounded returned unable to cultivate the fields. Others, with little or no experience in farming, found themselves lost in a world far from the battles and military discipline they had known for so long. The frustration was immense. Many veterans, especially those who had returned with serious injuries, couldn't support themselves on the land they had earned. The difficulties they faced after military service, both physical and social, couldn't simply be solved with a piece of land. The scarcity of resources, lack of logistical support, and the distance from Roman cities made life even harder for the veterans. Additionally, Rome, with its vastness and complexity, did not have an organized system in place to ensure these soldiers were properly cared for. Those who had served bravely but couldn't sustain their new properties often found themselves at the mercy of the goodwill of local senators, or, in some cases, relying on the charity of Roman citizens to survive. It was a young society that hadn't yet fully developed the means to care for its own heroes. This initial compensation system, while commendable in its intent, quickly showed its flaws. The empire was growing, and with it, the awareness that something more structured and sustainable was necessary. While the legions marched to victory, the issue of the well-being of retired soldiers was becoming an ever-growing shadow over the heads of Rome's rulers. It wasn't enough to grant land. A safety net was needed, a way to ensure that veterans didn't become a burden to society, but continued to be an active and respected part of it. It was then that the need for something more comprehensive started to emerge, something that would guarantee a dignified retirement for veterans without them having to fight again, this time for survival. Rome's vision was about to expand, and the solution would start to take shape, moving from symbolic compensation to a more structured and functional approach. The foundation of the Roman retirement system was about to be built, with lessons learned from past difficulties and the growing need to strengthen soldiers' loyalty to keep the empire firm in its glory. Imagine the scene, a line of soldiers marching under the blazing sun, their armor gleaming in the daylight, while the sound of their sandals hitting the ground echoes across the hills of Gaul or the distant lands of Syria. These were the Roman legionaries, men who dedicated their youth and often their lives to the expansion and defense of Rome. Military service wasn't just a job, it was a way of life, of existing within the empire's rigid structure. For many, life as a Roman soldier was the pinnacle of their existence. But this life, so immersed in battles and discipline, came at a cost. Service in the Roman army was long and grueling. The average service for a legionary was 25 years, a period that for many seemed like an eternity. During this time, soldiers faced severe conditions. They marched for miles under the weight of their armor, endured freezing winters and scorching summers, always ready to respond to the call of the empire. Constant preparation, fighting the elements, and violent confrontations on the frontiers were part of daily life. Although 25 years was the minimum, the truth is that many soldiers exceeded this time. The empire was in constant expansion, and the need for soldiers was enormous. With every new conflict, the legions were called to fight, and veterans often found themselves stuck in their obligation to serve. The stability of the empire depended on Rome's ability to maintain its military strength, and many legionaries continued in service until physical wear and tear or age forced them to retire. So it wasn't uncommon for a soldier to serve for more than 30 years, accumulating scars, experiences, and stories of epic battles. However, despite the long time and challenging conditions, there was immense honor associated with this service. The Roman soldier was not just a war machine, he was the pillar of Roman greatness. The training of the Roman legionary involved severe physical and mental preparation, transforming ordinary men into disciplined, imposing, and loyal warriors. These men were shaped by experience, and many, after finishing their service, continued to live in the shadow of that training. But this life of discipline and duty came at a price. The Roman army, for all its status as the most powerful military force of the ancient world, was also a field of sacrifice. The conditions were harsh, and physical exhaustion was constant. Many soldiers suffered from diseases, serious injuries, or even premature death due to the extreme demands of service. A legionary's life wasn't just made up of victories and glorious conquests. It was filled with moments of suffering, loneliness, and loss. Returning after years of service was often a time of great relief, but also great challenge. Soldiers, now veterans, faced the transition from military life to civilian life, which was not always simple. Those who had served for so many years, with their bodies marked by war, needed to adapt to a society that didn't fully understand the sacrifices they had made. However, the empire was starting to realize that it wasn't enough just to offer land or material compensation. Something more was needed to ensure that these veterans, after a lifetime of service, could be cared for and continue to contribute to Rome's greatness. Thus, the reflection on the long journey of Roman legionaries would transform into an even more important idea: that the empire couldn't allow its heroes to fall into oblivion, especially after decades of service. The time of service was coming to an end for many, but the lessons about the need for a more structured system were just beginning to take shape, initiating a change that would ensure the stability of the armies and the empire as a whole. In the battlefields of Rome, where the dust of war mixed with the sweat of legionaries, victory was the most desired reward. But behind the glory of conquests and territorial expansion, there was a dark reality that Rome preferred to ignore: the fate of invalid soldiers. Many fought bravely, facing the dangers of battles and the horrors of military campaigns, but not all returned in a physical or mental condition to resume a normal life. War, relentless, left deep scars, and the empire, so powerful and expansive, faced a silent dilemma: what to do with the soldiers who, upon returning, were broken, both by wounds and fatigue. The Roman army was an impressive fighting machine, but its greatness was sustained by the youth and energy of its legionaries. When these men found themselves unable to continue their journey of combat, whether due to serious wounds or diseases contracted during long years of service, what happened to them? The reality was that for a long time, the empire didn't have a defined structure to care for these soldiers. It was a tragic situation. The empire, which prided itself on its military strength, didn't offer effective support for those who had been injured defending Rome. Soldiers with mutilated arms or legs, men with deep scars and disfigurements that couldn't be healed, returned to society but found no place in it. Many were forgotten, cast aside, their lives after service a shadow of what they had been during their years of combat. Some resorted to begging or tried to survive as best they could, living in misery. Others sought support from generous local patrons who, in some cases, provided shelter and sustenance. But this often depended on the goodwill of a small number of people. And so, many invalid soldiers found themselves without hope. Their skills on the battlefield were no longer useful, and Rome's support system was ineffective, flawed, and lacked the resources to absorb the collateral damage of war. There was no pension system or structured compensation, and the veterans, now without the protection of the army, were left at the mercy of fate. This situation began to generate discomfort and frustration. The growing number of disabled veterans became a concern, not only socially, but also politically. They were a constant reminder that behind the glory of Rome, there were men who had sacrificed and were now facing a life of abandonment. This did not go unnoticed by the ruling classes, who realized that if they did not take action, they could face a revolt, a growing discontent that could undermine the very foundation of the empire. The problem was clear. How could morale remain high among active soldiers if those who had served bravely were left behind? The empire needed to act. And it was within this context, with increasing social pressure and the need to preserve Rome's internal stability, that the need for reforms arose. Reforms that would ensure not only rewards for soldiers, but a safety net for those who, after decades of service, deserved more than to be forgotten. Rome, a master at solving logistical and administrative problems, was beginning to understand that the solution to its growing population of disabled soldiers could not be a simple distribution of land or occasional handouts. Something more complex was needed, something that would ensure that those who had dedicated their lives to the defense of the empire did not become a burden on society. The future of the Roman military system was at stake, and this required a profound change. Rome was at a turning point. The empire, now ruled by Augustus, was recovering from decades of civil war. Rome's dominance was consolidated, but internal tensions, caused by the growing dissatisfaction of war veterans, threatened to destabilize the peace that Augustus had carefully worked to establish. The soldiers who had fought in Caesar's campaigns and secured victory in the final battles against internal enemies now found themselves abandoned. With no clear future, many were increasingly discontented, which posed a risk of revolt within the army. Augustus, aware of the power dynamics, knew he could not allow this situation to escalate. The empire, if it wanted to survive and thrive, needed to ensure that its heroes were not forgotten. In a decisive move, the emperor reformed Rome's military system, creating a structure that would be the foundation for the empire's stability in the centuries to come. Augustus not only instituted administrative reforms, but was able to see what the soldiers truly needed: a solid support network that would ensure a dignified life for those who had served Rome. His goal was clear: create a structure that solved the problem of disabled soldiers and kept morale high among the legions. It wasn't just about taking care of the veterans. It was about ensuring the army remained the beating heart of Rome, that its military strength was not weakened by discontent. Augustus' solution was more than just a response to an immediate problem. He structured a retirement system that would give veterans not only a secure future, but also the dignity they deserved. In one of his first measures, Augustus created a compensation model that offered veterans financial benefits and land. Unlike previous attempts, there was now a guarantee, something that ensured veterans would not be abandoned after their long and arduous decades of service. To do this, he implemented a new military fund, the aerarium militare, which would be responsible for financing these pensions and retirements. By establishing this fund, Augustus centralized the payments, ensuring a more efficient distribution and preventing veterans from being subject to the whims of local authorities or the sporadic generosity of patrons. The aerarium militare was not just a pragmatic measure. It was a way to build trust in the system. Veterans could now rely on a structured compensation system, a promise that throughout their lives they would be cared for as they deserved. But Augustus' reform did not stop there. By ensuring that land was distributed among the veterans, He also made it possible for these soldiers to integrate into civilian life. The land distribution in newly conquered provinces helped colonize these areas and ensured that Roman culture took root in distant regions. Rome was expanding, and the veterans, now Roman citizens with status and rights, became essential for consolidating the imperial presence. Additionally, with the reforms, Augustus not only created a financial support network, but also a long-term strategic vision. He knew the army needed stability to continue being the backbone of the empire, and this stability would not come without ensuring a secure future for those who served. He also understood that, for Rome to remain strong, its soldiers needed solid motivation to fight for it. The fact that they knew there would be security and a dignified place in society after the war not only reduced the risk of revolts, but also increased the loyalty and dedication of the legions. Thus, with Augustus' reform, a new cycle of trust and stability was established in Rome. Not only were the veterans cared for as they deserved, but the Roman army, now more motivated and with a safer outlook for the future, was renewed. The empire, with its restored strength and the veterans now valued, continued its expansion and great feats, knowing that behind its military power, there was a system that took care of those who sacrificed their lives to keep Rome at the top of the known world. In an empire as vast and complex as Rome, the administration of military finances needed to be meticulous and efficient. Before Augustus' reform, the payment of soldiers and support for veterans depended on irregular and often scarce sources. This created a sense of insecurity among both soldiers and rulers. To solve this issue and create a more structured and reliable system, Augustus instituted one of the most important innovations of his reform: the aerarium militare, the military fund designed to finance the pensions and retirements of Roman veterans. The aerarium militare was not just a financial measure, it was a key piece in ensuring the empire's internal stability. The creation of this fund had a profound impact, not only on the administration of the empire, but also on the relationship between the army and Rome's government. Before, the lack of a centralized system made soldiers and veterans dependent on favors or concessions from local officials, which led to inequalities and lack of transparency. Augustus, with his strategic vision, wanted a solid structure that would avoid these failures. The main function of the aerarium militare was to ensure that veterans received the promised benefits, mainly land and pensions, in a regular and organized manner. This was something completely innovative for the time. Until then, Roman veterans often faced delays in receiving their rewards or, in some cases, were simply forgotten. The centralized fund solved this issue, ensuring that veterans were paid fairly and on time, while also maintaining control over the flow of resources within the empire. The creation of the fund was both an economic and political measure, with the assurance that there would be a stable financial system to support the soldiers. Augustus also guaranteed the continued support of the legions. The soldiers knew they wouldn't just be cast aside after their service, they would have a protected future. This trust further reinforced the loyalty of the legions, as, in addition to the promise of timely payment, there was the certainty that the empire recognized and rewarded their efforts. The aerarium militare was financed through taxes on inheritances and goods sold. Thus, the financial structure of the empire became primarily responsible for keeping the system running. The Roman people, through taxes, contributed to the well-being of the soldiers. This system not only ensured the continuation of pensions, but also gave a sense of belonging to the common citizen, who, even though not directly involved in the battles, played his part in ensuring the well-being of those who protected Rome. Additionally, the creation of the fund also meant that Roman generals and officials no longer had the power to make isolated decisions regarding the benefits of veterans. This prevented abuses of power and made the process more equitable. The centralization of resources in the hands of the imperial government meant greater control and, consequently, higher efficiency. The aerarium militare was not just a financial management tool, but an essential piece to ensure that the empire remained united and strong. Augustus's innovation was also met with caution by some, as it meant greater centralization of power in the hands of the emperor. However, the effect of this system was undeniable. The soldiers were more motivated and committed to defending the empire, knowing that at the end of their careers, they would be treated with dignity. Thus, the aerarium militare became a symbol of how the Roman Empire knew how to evolve its structures to ensure the continuity of its greatness. It was a turning point, and the success of this reform marked the beginning of a new era for Rome, where the future of its soldiers and veterans was secure, and trust in the imperial institutions was stronger than ever. With the creation of the aerarium militare, the Roman Empire had taken a significant step toward ensuring the stability of its military system and the security of its soldiers after service. However, like any great innovation, the success of this system depended on a solid financial base. The empire needed to ensure a constant source of resources to support veterans' pensions and retirements, and for that, Augustus had to create an effective financing mechanism. The key to the functioning of the aerarium militare lay in how it would be financed. Instead of relying on volatile resources or grants from local generals, Augustus instituted a model that guaranteed a constant flow of money to the military fund. The main source of funding came from taxes on inheritances and goods sold, two forms of revenue collection that ensured a robust financial base for the system. For instance, inheritance taxes were levied in such a way as not to burden the Roman population, but at the same time ensure that the wealth accumulated by aristocratic families and the wealthiest Roman citizens was shared with veterans who had sacrificed their lives for the greatness of Rome. In many ways, this measure was a form of wealth redistribution, making sure that those who had benefited from the empire contributed to the welfare of the men who had defended their lands and values. Furthermore, taxes on goods sold allowed the aerarium militare to be fed with a regular source of income. Since Rome controlled vast trade networks and provinces across the known world, the movement of goods along these trade routes generated a tremendous amount of taxes directed toward the military fund. From Egyptian wheat to Gallic wine, each product crossing the empire's borders contributed in some way to the sustainability of the retirement system. These taxes, although regularly collected, were not levied in a way that harmed ordinary Romans. The funding structure was designed to balance the needs of Rome with the necessity of maintaining morale among the citizens. The empire had found a way to finance military retirements without compromising the local economy or creating widespread discontent. Unlike other financing systems that could be seen as unjust, the Roman model allowed different social classes to contribute to the well-being of the army without generating major inequalities. This financing model also had a profound impact on the relationship between the state and its citizens. Romans, seeing that the system was supported by taxes on wealth and goods, understood that the empire itself was investing in the care of its soldiers, not leaving the responsibility for this support to private or local initiatives. The centralized system, which ensured contributions came from all parts of Roman society, also helped reinforce a sense of unity and belonging among the Romans. They understood that everyone, in some way, was investing in the stability of the empire. With this model, the aerarium militare not only sustained itself, but also expanded, allowing the empire to continue protecting its citizens and soldiers with the same dedication that they showed in facing Rome's enemies. Regular financing and diversified revenue sources ensured that pensions and retirements were paid to veterans without fail, and this financial security was one of the main reasons for the success and longevity of the system. Thus, the financing model established by Augustus was not just an economic solution, but a smart political strategy that strengthened the relationship between the empire and its citizens. It further consolidated Rome's control over its vast provinces, while also reinforcing the support of its armies. Ultimately, the financing of the aerarium militare not only took care of war veterans, but also kept the imperial machinery running efficiently, creating a cycle of stability that benefited both the Romans and the empire as a whole. The missio honesta was more than a mere formality. It was a distinction of honor and a recognition of duty fulfilled. For Roman soldiers, completing 25 years of service was a challenging journey, filled with battles, rigorous training, and personal sacrifices. They faced the challenges of the empire, defended its borders, and maintained order within the vast lands Rome controlled. When the time came to retire, the missio honesta was the final reward, a sort of symbolic and practical reward for their dedication and loyalty to the empire. The document that bore this name was a kind of certificate of honor, attesting that the soldier had completed his military career with distinction. It was the guarantee that the veteran, upon returning to civilian life, would be entitled to a pension, land, or other compensations, depending on what was granted according to Augustus's reforms. But the value of the missio honesta was not just in the material compensations it ensured, but in the status it conferred on the soldier. From that moment on, he was not just a former soldier. He became a full Roman citizen, with all the privileges that came with it. When a soldier received the Missio Honesta, it was as if the empire was welcoming him back with open arms. He was no longer just a disposable piece of a military machine. He had become an example of dedication, someone worthy of respect and care. By granting this certificate, the empire also made a promise that the veteran would be cared for in his retirement, whether through land, pensions, or other compensations, depending on the circumstances. This not only reassured the soldiers, but also helped maintain morale within the legions. Romans knew that if they followed orders and dedicated themselves to the cause of Rome, there would be a secure future for them, a future of dignity. Moreover, the Missio Honesta played a crucial social role. By delivering the document, the empire not only recognized the soldier's service, but also signaled to society that he had been an integral part of Rome's greatness. The veteran became a prominent figure in the communities where he settled. Over time, many used their resources to start businesses, gain status, and in some cases, even become involved in local politics. Over time, many former soldiers became regional leaders, governing small provinces, or even becoming part of administrative structures that helped maintain order in the empire. It was therefore a virtuous cycle. The soldier's loyalty was rewarded with the Missio Honesta, and this reward, in turn, helped perpetuate the empire as veterans, with their new roles, maintained social and political stability. The Missio Honesta was not just a step at the end of a military career. It was the gateway to a new life, where the veteran could continue serving the empire in other ways, contributing to the prosperity and power of Rome. And as the empire was always expanding and transforming, the Missio Honesta became a vital link between the legions and Roman society. By ensuring that veterans had a stable and respected future, the empire not only consolidated its power, but also strengthened the bond between the legions and citizens, creating a network of trust that would last for centuries. Each soldier receiving this certificate knew that, although his sword had been laid to rest, his contribution to Rome would never be forgotten. Not all Roman soldiers were able to complete the 25 years of service required to obtain the honored Missio Honesta. For those who, due to health reasons or serious injuries, could not continue serving, there was another path to retirement, the Missio Caesaria. This document was equally significant, but its tone was more somber, as it represented the early farewell from the military career due to injuries, illness, or other incapacities. The Missio Caesaria was not a simple discharge. It acknowledged the soldier's suffering and sacrifice, but also ensured a dignified future for him outside the battlefield. For soldiers who had suffered severe injuries or contracted debilitating illnesses during service, this honor meant that, although they had been forced to leave the ranks, the empire still recognized their value and rewarded them accordingly. This document served as a way to ensure that the soldier, now out of combat, would not fall into poverty, but would be treated with respect. The compensation for those receiving the Missio Caesaria varied depending on the nature and severity of the injury or illness. For those who had served for a considerable time, but not long enough to complete the 25 years required, the empire still provided financial compensation, although in many cases, it was not as generous as that offered to veterans of the Missio Honesta. However, the most important thing was that the soldier was not forgotten. The Missio Caesaria guaranteed that he would have basic support and some social assistance to reintegrate into civilian life, albeit in a limited way. The value of the Missio Caesaria lay in its flexibility. The Roman Empire, recognizing that the conditions of war were unpredictable and often dangerous, offered this escape route for those who could no longer serve. It was not just physical injuries that caused incapacitation. Diseases, often the most insidious, also forced many men to abandon service. War was brutal, and the empire, aware of this, needed a system that not only cared for those who served for a lifetime, but also for those who, in one way or another, had been sacrificed for the glory of Rome. Although the Missio Caesaria was granted under more tragic circumstances, it still symbolized the honor and importance of the soldier within the empire. Those who retired through this concession were not seen as failures or as those who had failed in their mission, but as heroes who had given everything they could for Rome, even when their strength had been depleted. In many cases, these soldiers became respected figures in the towns where they settled, remembered as men who had given their health and youth for the greatness of the empire. Over time, many of these injured veterans, upon being discharged with the Missio Caesaria, began to take on roles in bureaucratic or administrative areas, using their military experience to serve in other capacities. Some were appointed to train new recruits, while others worked as guards or reserve soldiers. Even though they were no longer on the front lines, their experience was valued, and they continued to contribute significantly to the empire. Moreover, the Missio Caesarea also reflected the empire's zeal in ensuring that its soldiers, regardless of the circumstances, had a place in Roman society. It reaffirmed the empire's commitment to maintaining the dignity of its citizens, especially those who had risked their lives for the defense of the empire. The soldier receiving the Missio Caesarea knew that, even at the end of his military journey, he was still part of something much larger, and that his contribution would never be forgotten. During the centuries of the Roman Empire's expansion, the Roman legions faced intense battles, long campaigns, and extreme conditions, which led to widespread injuries and diseases among the soldiers. However, the empire, ever innovative, realized that the health of its military was a crucial factor for the continuity of its military strength. Thus, in one of Augustus's most impressive reforms, valetudinaria were established, permanent military hospitals that would play a key role in the recovery and care of injured or ill soldiers. These hospitals, built within military bases, were much more than simple makeshift facilities. They were designed with a surprisingly high level of sophistication for the time. Roman medical units were equipped with proper facilities to perform medical treatments, ranging from basic care to more complex procedures. Military doctors, known as medici, were rigorously trained to deal with injuries caused by weapons, infectious diseases, and even more specific issues, such as bone fractures and amputations. In the valetudinaria, soldiers not only received medical care, but also rest and recovery. The design of the facilities was thought out for comfort and treatment efficiency, with beds organized in a way that optimized space while separating the more critically ill from the less severe cases. Every military base had at least one hospital, and the larger ones, located in strategic areas with high troop movement, had even more elaborate medical centers with several specialized sections. This meant that, in any battlefield or base, the Romans had the capacity to treat their wounds quickly, maintaining their military strength at its peak. In some of the most intense battles, the rescue of wounded soldiers became a high-priority operation. For this, the Romans did not hesitate to create an effective system of mobile medical teams, which were designated to follow the troops and treat the wounded directly on the battlefield. These rescue units were made up of soldiers specially trained to identify severe injuries and provide first aid quickly. They were responsible for stabilizing the injured soldiers enough to transport them to the valetudinaria, where they could receive proper treatment. This strategy drastically reduced the number of deaths from hemorrhages or infections that, without immediate care, were common at the time. Furthermore, Roman military medicine advanced to the point of including practices that, although rudimentary by modern standards, were revolutionary for the period. Roman doctors used specialized surgical instruments such as forceps, blades, and scissors, which were sterilized and kept under strict hygiene conditions. The knowledge of treatments for injuries, such as the use of bandages, plasters, and dressings, was widely developed and documented. It was not uncommon for Roman military doctors to also use herbal remedies, many of which were passed down from previous civilizations, but with an enhanced technical understanding. The creation of the valetudinaria and mobile medical units demonstrated how committed the Roman Empire was to maintaining its military strength intact, not only during combat, but also in caring for the soldiers who risked their lives. Roman medical infrastructure became a model for future civilizations and served as the foundation for military healthcare systems that would endure for centuries. In the social and political context, the creation of these medical facilities also had a significant impact. By treating their wounded soldiers with respect and dignity, Rome strengthened loyalty and trust within its legions. Soldiers knew that if they were injured in combat, they would be taken care of in the best possible way, which fueled their sense of duty and determination. Additionally, the valetudinaria were also places of learning and research, where Roman doctors and surgeons exchanged experiences and improved their knowledge. This innovation, largely responsible for the lasting success of the Roman Empire, reflected Rome's commitment to its military strength and the health of its citizen soldiers. The Roman medical care system not only saved many lives, but also allowed the empire to continue expanding and maintaining its dominance over vast regions of the known world. As the Roman legions advanced across the vast territory of the empire, facing enemies in diverse environments, One of the greatest concerns was providing quick and effective care to soldiers wounded on the battlefields. War was brutal, and in the most intense battles, injury rates were extremely high, requiring immediate medical response to save lives and ensure the continuation of the fight. It was in this context that the Roman battlefield medical system stood out, becoming one of the most effective innovations of the time. In any major battle, the Roman legions were accompanied by mobile medical units, composed of doctors and assistants specially trained to act quickly under the harshest conditions. These units were the medical arm of the legion, capable of treating wounded soldiers immediately, minimizing the damage caused by a lack of urgent care. When a soldier was injured, one of the first to arrive at the scene was not the commander or lieutenant, but a military doctor, ready to act. The primary mission of the mobile medical teams was to stabilize the wounded as quickly as possible and transport them to the valetudinaria, the military hospitals, so they could receive specialized treatment. For this, the Romans developed a highly coordinated rescue system, where specially trained soldiers, known as medici, rushed to the scene of the injury right after the battle. They carried with them rudimentary but effective medical kits, containing items like bandages, sutures, and disinfecting liquids for treating wounds. These teams were often assisted by other members of the legion, such as aquilifers, eagle-bearers, and even uninjured combat soldiers, who formed rescue lines to bring the wounded soldiers to the doctors. In an era when the battlefield was often chaotic and bloody, speed and care and the ability to act without hesitation were vital to saving lives. Moreover, the Romans had an impressive ability to maintain organization, even in the most extreme situations. Although combat was fierce, the Roman legion understood that medical work was essential to the success of the mission. During battles, there was continuous coordination between the doctors, rescue soldiers, and senior officers. This collaboration allowed, while the fighting continued, the wounded to receive first aid, and the doctors had access to a safe area where they could work uninterrupted. Unlike other ancient civilizations, which often left wounded soldiers to fend for themselves or abandon them on the battlefield, Rome understood that keeping the army in good health was a priority. The Roman medical teams not only treated the wounded, but were also responsible for preventing infections, which were one of the leading causes of death after battles. The use of rudimentary antibacterial treatments, such as vinegar or boiled water to clean wounds, helped reduce the risk of infections that could spread quickly in unsanitary environments. Additionally, Roman military doctors were well trained in recognizing signs of psychological trauma, a growing concern in prolonged wars. Although the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder did not exist at the time, the Romans knew that soldiers could suffer psychological effects from the horrors of battle. Many Roman doctors were instructed to provide not only physical care, but also emotional support to soldiers who survived particularly violent combat. The Roman battlefield medical system not only reflected the sophistication of the empire, but also a deep respect for the lives of its soldiers. At a time when many armies treated the wounded as disposable, Rome showed that its strength lay not only in the ability of its legions, but also in its capacity to care for its members with humanity and precision. Over time, the effectiveness of these mobile medical units and the careful approach to the recovery of the wounded became a model for other civilizations. The Roman battlefield care system was undoubtedly one of the pillars that allowed the empire to keep its legions always ready, constantly renewing their strength and ensuring that the soldiers fighting for the greatness of Rome were treated with dignity and respect. As the Roman Empire expanded and its borders stretched across vast regions, Rome faced the challenge of ensuring not only the loyalty of its legions, but also the integration of newly conquered lands into the empire. It was a monumental task that required more than just military victory. Rome needed to colonize and Romanize the new provinces, bringing order, infrastructure, and above all, social stability. One of the most effective solutions to achieve this goal was the distribution of land to veterans, a strategy that not only rewarded soldiers for their years of service, but also solidified Roman control over newly conquered territories. The distribution of land to veterans became a common practice during the Roman Republic and continued to be fundamental during the empire. After completing their long and arduous military campaigns, soldiers not only received financial compensation or pensions, but also land in distant regions, often on the borders or in newly pacified provinces. This system had multiple benefits, both for Rome and for the veterans. For the soldiers, the the land distribution represented a secure future. Retired from war, they became landowners and could use their properties to grow food, support their families, and generate wealth. For many, this offered the opportunity to start a new life away from the horrors of the battlefield. However, for some, it was not just a reward but a necessity, as life as a farmer was a way to ensure survival after years of military service, often with injuries that prevented them from working in other professions. For Rome, this practice provided a practical way to consolidate its power in the more distant provinces. By distributing land to its veterans, Rome not only ensured that former soldiers were financially stable, but also made sure that Roman culture was firmly implanted in new territories. The veterans, now landowners, were encouraged to Romanize the regions, introducing Roman agricultural practices, building infrastructure, and maintaining order. These small communities, mostly composed of former soldiers, functioned as a kind of living defense line, protecting Roman interests on the borders and preventing potential revolts. The land was usually distributed in newly conquered provinces, such as Gaul, Hispania, North Africa, and Asia Minor. In these regions, former soldiers often became the first settlers, establishing military cities and small villages where, over time, new Roman cities emerged. These areas were strategically chosen. Instead of focusing on large cities, Rome opted to promote settlements in rural areas and on the borders, where military presence was crucial for Roman control. The founding of military colonies by veterans, far from being a simple act of distribution, served to protect and expand the empire's borders while also solidifying Roman presence in the territory. The process of land distribution was both a symbolic and practical act. It not only rewarded veterans for their service, but also boosted the morale of the legions, as soldiers knew that after years of hard service, they would have a secure future. Loyalty to the empire was thus reinforced by a system that ensured the financial and social stability of the former soldiers. The veterans, in turn, were recognized as full Roman citizens with access to lifelong benefits. However, not all veterans lived a peaceful life after receiving their land. Many faced difficulties in cultivating the land they were given, especially those who had been wounded or lacked agricultural experience. Despite this, the system ensured that Rome not only provided veterans with a piece of land, but also actively integrated them into the empire's expansion process. Thus, land distribution became a crucial pillar of Roman policy. By integrating veterans into civilian life while solidifying Roman power at the borders, Rome not only took care of its ex-soldiers, but also ensured that the empire remained united and strong, even after the fighting had ended. After years of service in the legions, facing bloody battles and immeasurable challenges, many Roman veterans faced a new challenge: the transition to civilian life. Although the Roman Empire offered a robust retirement system, with land and pensions, the real question was what soldiers would do after laying down their swords and shields. The answer lay in the versatility the empire provided, allowing its veterans to find new paths and contribute in various ways to Roman society. Post-military life for a veteran was not one of complete rest. Many ex-soldiers used retirement as a starting point for new adventures, and as full Roman citizens, they had access to opportunities in various sectors of public and private life. The land they received in the provinces was often used to start a new career as farmers, cultivating the land and forming new families. These settlements in the areas pacified by the empire were essential for the Romanization of the conquered territories and for strengthening the empire's infrastructure. But not all veterans saw themselves as farmers. Many sought new horizons, especially in urban areas where the empire was thriving. Some veterans became merchants, using their organizational skills and discipline acquired in the army to manage shops, markets, and other commercial ventures. Others, more adventurous, decided to travel to the great cities of the empire, such as Rome, Alexandria, or Carthage, in search of new opportunities and a more prosperous future. There were also those who saw their military experience as a platform to enter local politics. Many veterans, with the natural authority gained during their years of service, became influential figures in the communities they lived in, taking on leadership roles such as local magistrates or governors of small towns. As former soldiers, they were respected for the discipline and courage shown during the war, and this translated into political power in civilian spheres. Additionally, many veterans, especially the elderly or those who had been seriously injured, found roles in more administrative or supervisory positions. Some became instructors for new recruits, passing on their military knowledge and experience to the new generations of legionaries. Others, with the experience gained over their campaigns, worked as guards in fortresses or even as magistrates in border cities, helping to maintain order in the empire. The network of contacts built over the years in the army also helped veterans reintegrate more easily into civilian society. The bonds of camaraderie and the military hierarchy provided a support structure, and many veterans gathered to form associations or guilds of ex-combatants, ensuring the continuity of a sense of community even after their active service ended. However, post-military life was not always easy. Veterans returning wounded or with battle scars faced difficulties adjusting to their new reality. Some found themselves dependent on the generosity of local patrons or state pensions, which, although helpful, were not always sufficient. The lack of experience outside the battlefield, physical wounds, and the psychological challenges many faced made the adjustment even harder. Indeed, the Roman veteran was a resilient and multifaceted figure. His post-military life was marked by a process of adaptation, but also by a deep sense of honor and loyalty to the empire. The training and bonds formed during military service not only helped them survive, but also thrive. And these transitions from war to peace are a clear example of how Rome cared for its soldiers even after their battle missions ended. Thus, life after military service became a new chapter, where Roman veterans were often the pillars of new communities, whether as farmers, merchants, politicians, or instructors. With their life experience and resilience, they were not just a reflection of Rome's military power, but also of the continuity of a society that valued the soldiers who kept it united. The Roman Empire was not limited to conquering lands and defeating enemies. It had a much broader and strategic plan to ensure its permanence and prosperity. Victories in battle were just the beginning of a journey to integrate the conquered territories into the vast Roman domain. To do this, Rome adopted a system of strategic colonization, and the veterans of the legions played a crucial role in this process. Rome knew that it wasn't enough to simply occupy new territories. It was necessary to Romanize these regions, consolidating its influence and maintaining stability. The military presence at the borders was not only to protect the conquered lands, but also to colonize and establish a strong Roman identity in distant locations. Roman colonization was not limited to the construction of fortresses or the imposition of laws. It also involved creating new communities, with the integration of Roman civilians and especially the veterans themselves, who were the key to the success of this process. When a Roman soldier retired, he was often given land in the conquered provinces. These land distributions had a much deeper purpose than ensuring the retirement of veterans. They served as an active colonization tool. The land was given in strategic regions, often at the borders or in pacified areas, where the empire needed to establish a permanent presence. By settling in these areas, the veterans not only founded new Roman communities, but also helped Romanize the territories, introducing the Latin language, Roman laws, and empire customs. These new settlements, known as military colonies, were essentially points of resistance against any attempts at revolt or invasion by local peoples. Veterans who became landowners were encouraged to create small cities, where they became figures of authority and the first voices of the empire in remote regions. They were the first to practice Roman law, establish markets, and create infrastructures like roads, bridges, and aqueducts, which facilitated the expansion of the empire and the circulation of resources. At the same time, this practice of military colonization also served to pacify the conquered territories, as the veterans themselves, with their military skills and knowledge of Roman tactics, ensured the security of the new regions. In many cases, these colonies became living fortresses, where the presence of retired soldiers acted as a defense line against possible rebellions or external attacks. Thus, the loyalty of these ex-soldiers to the empire was crucial to ensuring that the Romanization process was effective and lasting. Moreover, the military colony became a showcase for local powers, a clear example of how Rome managed its territories and cared for its citizens. For the local populations, seeing Roman soldiers establishing families, creating properties, and doing business in the region was a powerful way to convince them to accept Roman authority. Over time, many of the conquered peoples began to assimilate Roman values and culture, directly influenced by the veterans who led these communities. This practice also helped reduce tensions in border areas, where military pressure was constant and local tribes often opposed Roman presence. By deploying veterans in key regions, Rome not only secured its borders, but also made the process of Romanization more effective, bringing along Rome's security and power. Across the empire, these military colonies became crucial for maintaining imperial cohesion. They not only strengthened Roman defenses, but were also centers of cultural and economic innovation, where Roman culture thrived, creating a unique environment that blended military and civilian life. The veterans, through their presence and influence in conquered lands, transformed these regions into prosperous and secure cities, where Roman culture, order, and law were consolidated as the pillars of a new Rome. Thus, the Roman Empire managed to expand not only through military force, but also by the peaceful and lasting integration of newly conquered lands, with veterans as the primary agents of this transformation. They were not just the guardians of the borders, but the very builders of Rome, carrying Roman culture and order to the farthest corners of the empire. Although Rome's retirement system was revolutionary and provided many benefits for veterans, not everyone was able to reintegrate into civilian life ideally. Soldiers who returned from battles wounded or debilitated often faced difficulties working the lands they were granted or adapting to life away from the trenches. However, Rome knew that these difficulties did not mean the end of these men's usefulness to the empire. The empire created several ways to repurpose these invalid soldiers into roles that aligned with their skills and experiences, ensuring that they could still contribute to the empire, even in different capacities. One of the main solutions found was assigning bureaucratic roles. Many veterans were integrated into the empire's administrative system, where their organizational skills and military discipline were highly valued. These former soldiers took on roles such as clerks, accountants, or even public works supervisors, being stationed in strategic regions to ensure order was maintained. The process of administration and control in the provinces required a solid and trustworthy structure, something that veterans, with their military training, provided efficiently. These veterans, though removed from battle, still represented the moral and physical strength of the empire, even in the calmest roles. Additionally, many of these soldiers were employed in training and military education roles. The experience accumulated from battles and years of service made these veterans ideal instructors for new recruits. In various regions, they taught the fundamentals of military discipline, the Roman way of fighting, and the use of weapons, preparing the next generation of legionaries to defend the empire. In other cases, they were assigned to act as guards at fortresses or forward posts, where surveillance and maintaining order were essential. In these roles, the veterans continued to fulfill their role as defenders of Rome, albeit in a less direct way. This flexibility in employing veterans demonstrated how Rome managed to make use of the experiences and knowledge accumulated by its soldiers. By integrating these men into the social system in alternative ways, the empire ensured that its veterans did not become a burden on society, but on the contrary, continued to be key players in the functioning of its military and administrative machine. At the same time, Rome showed the world that even invalid or war-weary soldiers could continue to serve with honor and dignity, a true lesson in solidarity and social strategy. In the vast Roman Empire, managing the retirement system and military pensions was no simple task. To ensure that retired soldiers received their benefits fairly and efficiently, the emperor appointed a crucial figure: the military prefects. These officials were responsible for managing the military fund and distributing pensions to veterans, as well as ensuring that the promises made by the empire to its soldiers were fulfilled. The military prefects were trusted men of the emperor, with extensive knowledge of Rome's military and administrative structure, who made sure the retirement system functioned in an organized and flawless manner. These prefects had a wide range of responsibilities, far beyond simple financial administration. They acted as mediators between the veterans and the government, ensuring that complaints and disputes were handled fairly. In such a vast and diverse empire, problems related to service time, pension values, or even the location of the land grants were common. The military prefects resolved these issues, ensuring that veterans were not left helpless or wronged. They were also responsible for ensuring pensions and other benefits were paid on time, preventing veterans from feeling abandoned by the empire. In addition to their administrative roles, military prefects played an important role in maintaining morale within the legions and among veterans. In some situations, These officials were called upon to intervene to calm discontent or prevent uprisings from soldiers unhappy with their retirement or compensation. As representatives of the emperor, the military prefects had the authority needed to deal with sensitive issues and ensure loyalty to the empire was maintained. They also dealt with matters related to the organization and recruitment of the armed forces, as well as reviewing official documents granting retirement rights, such as the famous Missio Honesta. This efficient and centralized system of administration was one of the keys to social stability within the Roman Empire. Thanks to the work of the military prefects, Rome was able to maintain a loyal and well-protected military force, while also providing its veterans with a secure future, even after years of combat. The prefects became indispensable figures, not only in resource management, but also as guarantors of order and military morale in one of the greatest civilizations in history. Although the Roman Empire's retirement system was one of the best structured in antiquity, it did not cater to all members of the army in the same way. For higher-ranking officials, such as generals and tribunes, the path to a peaceful and financially secure retirement was a bit different. These officials, who had accumulated prestige and wealth throughout their careers, had access to private retirement funds, in addition to the public benefits provided by the state. This created a distinction between the different classes of soldiers, but also reflected the hierarchical nature of Roman society, where those with more power and status had access to additional resources. While regular legionaries depended on the aerarium militare, the public fund that supported pensions and retirements, senior officers could invest their own money in rural properties, private businesses, or even real estate ventures. These investments provided them with a steady passive income, allowing them to live comfortably after their retirement. Many high-ranking officers would retire to their estates in peaceful regions of the empire, where they could live with the dignity their position and wealth deserved. In these areas, they could expand their businesses, manage large estates, or even get involved in local politics, using their military experience and network of contacts to maintain a position of influence. In addition to properties and businesses, some senior officers used their position to secure additional private funds through imperial donations or personal inheritances. The practice of receiving donations from the emperor or other members of the Roman elite was common and often part of a mutual agreement. Senior officers offered military and political support to the emperor in exchange for financial resources to ensure their retirement. These officers, in turn, often became influential figures in the provinces and continued to play an active role in defending the empire, even after their military careers had ended. This private retirement system, while limited to a small number of high-ranking individuals, reflected the social stratification of Rome and its ability to ensure financial security for the more powerful. For senior officers, retirement was a natural transition to a new phase of prosperity and influence, where service to the empire was rewarded with wealth and privileges. These men, whose decisions and actions shaped Rome's destiny, found in their later years the opportunity to enjoy the rewards of a career dedicated to achievements. The peculium castrans, a term that sounds almost like a military inheritance, was the way Roman soldiers accumulated a form of personal savings throughout their military careers. During their years of service, legionaries could receive war prizes, imperial rewards, or donations, which were saved as a future nest egg. Although this fund was not necessarily intended for retirement, it served as a financial safety net, allowing soldiers to prepare for life after service, or in many cases, maintain a good standard of living while still on duty. These funds were not something soldiers could access at any time, but were officially recorded and controlled by military command. The peculium castrans became a kind of forced savings, but at the same time, it served as recognition for loyalty and service to the empire. Over the course of their careers, soldiers accumulated this peculium, and when discharged from service, they could access the amount saved, which became a financial fortress, especially in times of war and uncertainty. For many, this reserve meant self-sufficiency and the opportunity to build something beyond military life. However, the peculium castrans also had an important aspect in terms of asset transfer. When a soldier passed away, the money did not disappear but could be passed on to their heirs, usually their children or closest relatives. This provided financial stability for the families of soldiers who had fallen in battle or were already retired, maintaining the bond between the soldier and Roman society. The idea of passing on wealth was deeply rooted in Roman culture, and the peculium castrans ensured that military legacies did not vanish with each life. This transfer of assets also reinforced the concept of family legacy, a highly important idea for Romans, ensuring that a soldier's name and achievements would live on, even after their death. Thus, the peculium castrans was not only a savings practice or a financial benefit, but also a reflection of Rome's deep commitment to its soldiers, who were seen as essential pillars for maintaining and expanding the empire. This tradition helped ensure that soldiers felt respected and protected, whether during their active careers or afterward, ensuring a cycle of continuity and loyalty within the Roman armed forces. In ancient Rome, where an individual's value was often tied to their social status and the legacy they left behind, the right to make a military will was an important prerogative for soldiers. This right was not granted to just anyone, but to those who were part of the Roman army and found themselves far from home, facing the uncertainty and dangers of combat. The will was not just a legal formality, but a mechanism for ensuring the protection of soldiers' families, guaranteeing that their property would be inherited according to their wishes after their death. This practice was deeply linked to the idea of honor and the desire to ensure that the soldier's legacy and inheritance were preserved by their family without disputes or legal confusion. For soldiers, making a will was not just about organizing the distribution of material goods. It was also a way to make clear their commitment to both Rome and their family. In the will, the soldier had the opportunity to designate who would be the beneficiaries of their wealth, but they could also appoint future guardians for their children, or even establish a moral and civic example for their family, ensuring their loved ones would follow their instructions in case of their death. This formality also demonstrated respect for order and tradition within the empire, allowing the soldier to maintain their dignity and autonomy, even after death. The Roman military will held significant legal weight within the social structure of the empire, and its execution was governed by strict rules to ensure that the soldiers' wishes were carried out accurately. The documents related to the will were carefully archived and validated by military authorities, and their enforcement was monitored seriously. In this way, Roman soldiers could die in battle with the certainty that if they fell, their families would be financially protected and their property would not be usurped. This offered an extra layer of peace of mind to soldiers, who, far from home and facing daily dangers, knew that, even in their absence, their responsibilities and bonds with their loved ones would be honored. Ultimately, the right to a military will was one of the many ways the Roman Empire demonstrated its commitment to social stability and the well-being of those who dedicated their lives to defending and expanding the empire. For soldiers, the will was both a guarantee of the future for their families and a statement of honor and loyalty to the empire, which granted them this freedom in exchange for their lives and services. The retirement system and its associated benefits had a profound impact on the morale and motivation of the Roman army. Knowing that after years of hard service and sacrifice, soldiers would not simply be discarded or forgotten, but rather rewarded with a dignified retirement, legionaries felt more committed to the cause of the empire. This financial security awaiting them after retirement provided a sense of protection, both for them and their families, which translated into even greater engagement in battles and military campaigns. The soldier knew that, when their career ended, they would not be just an abandoned veteran left to fend for themselves, but a respected citizen with a new opportunity to build a stable life. Additionally, the knowledge that there was a support network and structured benefits for former soldiers helped reduce the risk of desertion or insubordination within the army ranks. Loyalty to the emperor and the empire was strengthened because the soldiers saw that their contributions would be valued in a tangible way, not just through speeches or vague promises. The sense of duty was fueled by the certainty that, when retirement came, their dedication to the empire would be properly recognized and rewarded. This reward mechanism also prevented potential rebellions or attempts at insurrection, as the army knew that over time, it could secure a prominent position within Roman society. The guarantee of a peaceful retirement not only motivated soldiers individually, but also contributed to strengthening the sense of unity within the legions. When a soldier knew they were fighting for the same benefits as their comrades in arms, it created a bond of solidarity and collective spirit among the members of the army. The promise of a secure future after the war was not just an individual hope, but a shared goal that united everyone under one objective. In an environment where discipline and hierarchy were essential, the retirement system became another way to reinforce this structure, keeping soldiers motivated, disciplined, and ready to fulfill their mission. This positive impact on morale extended beyond the moment of retirement. The knowledge that soldiers were secured after the end of their careers created a cycle of trust between the empire and its armed forces, which was crucial for the longevity and expansion of the Roman Empire. By investing in the well-being of its soldiers, Rome was, in fact, investing in the stability and future of the empire itself, ensuring that its legions remained an unbeatable force across the known world. The Roman retirement system had a lasting influence that went beyond the borders of the Roman Empire and left a significant legacy in the social welfare structures of various subsequent cultures and civilizations. The idea that soldiers who had dedicated their lives to military service deserved financial security and support at the end of their careers was not only innovative, but also fundamental to the stability and prosperity of the empire. This welfare model was one of the earliest examples of a structured social assistance system, creating a solid foundation upon which future civilizations, and even modern states, would develop systems to care for their most vulnerable citizens. The way Rome institutionalized care for veterans and ex-soldiers, with pensions and properties, is one of the hallmarks of a progressive mindset regarding the treatment of workers and citizens. When we look at modern social welfare models, such as veterans' pensions, we can see that many of these systems were inspired by the concepts established by Rome. The practice of ensuring that veterans and soldiers had a dignified existence after military service directly influenced military pension systems in various countries, such as in England and the United States, where veterans also receive retirement benefits and medical assistance. The Aerarium Militare, the fund created by Augustus, is considered by some historians to be one of the earliest forms of social insurance. Its creation centralized the financial resources needed to ensure that retired and disabled soldiers would not be left to the mercy of luck or public charity. Moreover, the Roman retirement system was not limited to financial aid. It also had a significant impact on how military societies were organized and how the armed forces were treated in the government framework. Rome showed deep concern for the physical and mental health of its soldiers, a concept that was revolutionary at the time. This attention to the care of soldiers, both during and after service, reflected a holistic view of how the individuals comprising the army should be treated, recognizing them as complete human beings and not just instruments of war. This mindset began to spread to other military cultures, influencing army administration and the treatment of veterans in times of peace, an idea that persisted throughout history. Ancient Rome, with its social and military innovations, not only built one of the most powerful empires in history, but also established practices that shaped the way modern societies treat workers, veterans, and citizens at risk. The Roman retirement system became a cornerstone that would inspire future generations and continues to be studied as an example of social management and government responsibility. The Roman Empire stood out not only as an incomparable military power, but also for its pioneering vision in how to take care of its soldiers and citizens after the end of their careers, creating one of the first and most effective retirement systems in history. The concern for the well-being of veterans and the guarantee of a dignified life after years of service were essential factors in preserving loyalty and morale within the army, as well as helping to maintain internal stability in the empire. The system created by Augustus and his successors not only provided security for those who fought for Rome, but it also became a model for many future societies, reflecting innovative and visionary social management. When we look at ancient Rome, we can see that the empire was not only concerned with conquering and expanding, but also with ensuring long-term social and military sustainability. The success of this system demonstrated that a strong empire depends not only on a powerful army, but also on solidarity and respect for the people who sustain that power. Roman retirement was not just a reward, but an investment in the future, ensuring that veteran soldiers continued to contribute to society in new roles, whether as farmers, merchants, or local leaders. Moreover, the lesson Rome left us goes beyond the military field. The Roman retirement system demonstrates how effective social management can create an environment of harmony and prosperity. In an increasingly complex world, it's important to remember that the stability and success of a society do not depend solely on its military or economic power, but also on how it values and cares for its citizens, especially those who have made significant contributions to its security and growth. The Roman legacy, therefore, is not just a history of conquests and battles, but also of social responsibility, and how societies can evolve to become more just and equitable. This model of caring for soldiers is reflected, in a way, in the social welfare models we see in various countries today, making the Roman system one of humanity's first great social innovations. The Roman Empire, thus, not only left humanity an unbeatable army, but also taught us that caring for those who defend the nation is essential to maintaining the strength and cohesion of a society over time. To conclude, thank you for following along with our video, and I hope you've learned a lot about the Roman retirement system and how it influenced the modern world. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to leave a like. It helps a lot in spreading the video and motivates us to bring more interesting information to you. Now, I want to know your opinion. What did you think of the Roman retirement system? Leave your comment below, share your thoughts and reflections. And if you're not subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos, with more curiosities about the Roman Empire and many other fascinating topics. See you next time.